Have you ever stumbled upon an old British coin and wondered if it's just pocket change or something truly valuable? Today, we're diving into the world of the British Florin, also known as the 2 shilling coin, a fascinating piece of UK currency history. Whether you're a curious collector or just exploring old coins from your drawer, this video uncovers the secrets, history, and potential value of some iconic florins. We'll break down 3 specific years, 1963, 1956, and 1966, and explore what makes each of them special. Let's start with the 1963 florin. Alright, first up, let's talk about the 1963 British florin coin. This one's an interesting piece not just because of its age, but because it stands at the edge of a big change in British currency. The florin itself has been around since the mid-1800s, but by the time we hit the 1960s, things were getting ready to shift toward decimalization. So yeah, the 1963 florin? It's one of the last few in that long traditional run. Let's start with what this coin actually looks like. If you've got one in your hand or just seen photos, you'll notice Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse. That's the front. This portrait is known as the first portrait of the Queen. She's young, wearing a laurel wreath, and the legend around her reads, Elizabeth II Dei Gratia Regina F Laughing Face, which basically means Elizabeth II, by the grace of God, Queen, Defender of the Faith. Pretty formal, right? But that's the style. Now flip it over and take a look at the reverse. You'll see 4 distinct shields arranged in a cross pattern, with a floral emblem between each. It's a super elegant design created by Edgar Fuller and Cecil Thomas, and it really captures the sense of British heritage. The shields represent England, Scotland, and Ireland. The inscription reads, 2 shillings 1963, nice and clear, so you know exactly what you're holding. Now let's talk size and specs. The 1963 florin was minted in copper-nickel. That's a mix of copper and nickel, since the days of real silver coins were long gone by then. Back in the 1800s, florins were silver, but by 1947, Britain switched over to copper-nickel for cost reasons. The coin weighs about 11.3 grams and has a diameter of 28.5 millimeters with a reeded edge, those ridges on the side. Now here's where things get a little spicy. Let's talk about how rare or valuable this coin might be. The 1963 British florin isn't considered a rare coin, to be honest. It was a high mintage year, with millions of these coins pumped out for circulation. So if you've got one, chances are it's common, but don't be too quick to toss it aside. The real question is condition. Coins that are in uncirculated or extremely fine condition, basically coins that still look shiny and sharp with all the details clear, can still grab the attention of collectors. In such condition, a 1963 florin might fetch around £1 to £5, sometimes more if it's graded and slabbed professionally. Now, that might not sound like a fortune, and it's not, but think about it this way. You've got a piece of history in your hands, something from the early days of Queen Elizabeth's reign, something that connects to a time before the UK went decimal in 1971. That's pretty cool. And let's not forget the emotional or nostalgic value. For people born in the early 60s or even before, this coin might bring back memories of the old days, when a shilling meant something, and you could buy sweets at the corner shop with a couple of coins. It's a little time capsule. Collectors usually look for brilliant, uncirculated BU examples of this coin. If it's still in mint packaging or has been preserved carefully, it could have a little more value, especially to someone building a full set of florins from the Elizabethan era. Now here's a fun fact. The florin itself was originally introduced in 1849 as part of an experiment with decimalization. That's right, over 100 years before Britain actually adopted decimal currency, they were already thinking about it. The florin was meant to be 1/10 of a pound, which fit the idea of dividing the pound into 100 pence. But full decimalization didn't actually happen until 1971, so the 1963 florin sits right near the end of that long story. So where might you find one today? Well, if you're in the UK, you might still come across a few florins tucked away in older relatives' drawers, piggy banks, or random stashes of coins. They're not in circulation anymore, obviously, but they're still very accessible through coin dealers, antique markets, and online platforms like eBay or Numismatist. Now let's talk about collecting tips for anyone new who's watching this. If you want to start a florin collection, coins like the 1963 are a great place to begin. They're cheap, widely available, and give you a great visual taste of British pre-decimal coinage. Try to get them in good condition. Look for coins with minimal scratches, strong detail in the Queen's portrait, and a sharp reverse. Also, here's something worth noting. While most of the 1963 florins are standard, errors and misstrikes can happen. If you find a coin with an off-center strike, a double date, or any weird blemishes from a minting process, that might be a jackpot. These kinds of error coins are super popular in the collector world and can go for much higher prices depending on how unusual the error is. In terms of historic value, 1963 was a pretty iconic year in Britain. We're talking early Beatles, swinging 60s just around the corner, and a cultural shift happening throughout the UK. The 1963 florin might not seem like much, but it came out during a time of transformation, and that kind of context adds a bit of flair to the coin. One last thing before we move on. If you're handling these coins, remember to take care of them properly. Avoid touching them directly with your fingers if you're serious about keeping them in good shape. Use soft cloth gloves, store them in acid-free sleeves or coin flips, and avoid PVC holders that can damage the metal over time. So to wrap it up, 1963 florin equals not super rare, but historically meaningful. Features the young Queen Elizabeth II portrait. Copper nickel, not silver. Worth around £1 to £5 depending on condition. Great starter coin for any UK collection. Might carry personal or nostalgic value. Keep an eye out for errors or pristine condition examples. Alright, let's move on to the 1956 British Florin coin, a gem from the mid-1950s. If you've got a 1956 florin in your collection, you're holding onto a piece of history that was made during a time of major change in the United Kingdom. The 1950s were a decade of recovery and transformation, with post-war Britain slowly rebuilding, and the world moving into a new era. Just like the 1963 florin we just covered, the 1956 coin also features Queen Elizabeth II on the obverse. However, the portrait on this one is from her second portrait, which was designed by the renowned sculptor Mary Gillick. This portrait is a little more mature than the one on the 1963 coin, which reflects the Queen's image as she became more established on the throne. The inscription around the edge reads, Elizabeth II Gratia Regina F. Laughing-faced, just like the 1963 version, and it's a classic mark of British coinage. Now, let's flip this coin over and check out the reverse side, which is the real beauty of the florin. The reverse design of the 1956 florin is very similar to the 1963 coin. It features a cross of 4 shields with floral emblems between each. These shields represent England, Scotland, and Ireland. You'll also find the words 2 Shillings 1956 around the outer edge, making it super easy to identify. Speaking of design, the florin coins were all about elegance and royal symbolism, so it's no wonder that the reverse design stayed quite consistent for many years. However, the 1956 florin carries a certain vintage charm, especially for collectors who are into mid-20th century British currency. It was designed by Edgar Fuller, and it has that timeless, traditional British look to it, a true reflection of the post-war era when national pride was important, and the design of money represented strength and continuity. When we talk about material, the 1956 florin is also made of copper nickel, just like the 1963 florin. By the time the 1950s came around, silver coins had become less common in circulation due to the costs involved with using precious metals. Instead, Britain switched to copper nickel, a mixture of copper and nickel, which was cheaper and more durable for mass production. The 1956 florin weighs about 11.3 grams and has a diameter of 28.5 millimeters, with a reeded edge just like its counterparts from other years. Now let's talk value, because let's face it, we all want to know if this old coin is worth anything. The 1956 British florin, while not extremely rare, does have some charm for collectors, especially those focused on post-war British currency. In terms of value, the 1956 florin is generally worth around £1 to £5 in circulated condition. But, just like with the 1963 florin, the key here is condition. If you've got a 1956 florin in mint or uncirculated condition, you might be able to sell it for a bit more, anywhere from £10 to £15 for an excellent example. In fact, condition is critical for determining the value of these coins. If the coin has been well preserved over the decades, it can be much more valuable to collectors who appreciate the rare beauty of a mint coin. These coins, in perfect condition, can often sell for a premium because they're harder to come by in such a pristine state. As a piece of British history, the 1956 florin holds significance beyond its face value. It's one of the last years that the florin was minted before the country made its shift toward decimalization in the 1970s. Just think about it, the 1956 florin was circulating when Queen Elizabeth II was still relatively young and early in her reign. This was during the era when Winston Churchill was leading Britain and the country was recovering from the Second World War. For collectors, the 1956 florin represents an important moment in British currency. It's a beautiful example of mid-century British design, and it captures the national sentiment of the time. Whether you're just starting your collection or adding to an existing set of florins, the 1956 is a piece that should not be overlooked. Let's talk about finding these coins today. While the 1956 florin isn't exactly rare, it's still a popular coin among collectors of pre-decimal British currency. You can find these coins on eBay, at coin dealers, and sometimes even at antique shops or markets. It's not hard to track one down, but remember, condition is everything. A coin in good, uncirculated condition will always command more attention and higher prices from collectors. Also, just like with the 1963 florin, keep an eye out for error coins. These are coins that may have been struck with a mistake during the minting process, like a misaligned design or double striking. Such errors can increase the value of a coin significantly because they are considered rare. So, if you've got a florin that looks a bit off, it could be worth looking into further. Let's also talk about some fun facts that make the 1956 florin unique. For one, 1956 was a pretty iconic year in British history. It was the year that Queen Elizabeth II marked her first full decade on the throne, and the Suez Crisis dominated global politics. The royal family was still very much in the spotlight, and the country was still adjusting to the post-war era. So, when you hold a 1956 florin, you're holding a coin from a significant year in the UK's mid-20th century story. Finally, if you're handling this coin as a collector, make sure you store it properly. Coins like these should be protected from dirt, moisture, and handling that can wear down the design. Keeping your florins in coin capsules or acid-free holders will preserve their value and ensure they last for generations to come. So to recap, 1956 florin, not rare, but a great piece of British history. Features the second portrait of Queen Elizabeth II, made of copper nickel. Value ranges from £1 to £5, with higher prices for pristine examples. Alright, next up, let's talk about the 1966 British florin coin, one of the very last florins to ever be minted in the UK. This coin isn't just another piece of metal, it marks the final chapter in the long story of the florin, a coin that had been part of British currency since 1849. So if you're holding a 1966 florin, you're actually holding a farewell to a legend. Let's jump into the design first. Just like the previous two coins we covered, the obverse of the 1966 florin features a portrait of Queen Elizabeth II. This is still the famous Mary Gillick portrait, showing the Queen wearing a wreath instead of a crown, a softer, more youthful image of the monarch. Around the edge, you'll read, Elizabeth II Gratia Regina F. Laughing Face. Still the same formal style, meaning Elizabeth II by the grace of God, Queen, Defender of the Faith. Now flip the coin over and we see the familiar reverse design, but this time it feels a little more symbolic. The 1966 florin still has the four shields representing England, Scotland, and Ireland, with decorative floral emblems filling the gaps. The inscription says 2 shillings 1966, and even though it's the same as the earlier coins, there's something kind of poetic about seeing that date on the coin. This was the last year of regular florin production before decimalization really started to take over. You see, by 1967, the UK was well into preparation for decimalization. People knew big changes were coming, and that the old money, shillings, florins, half-crowns, would soon be replaced with a system based on 100 new pence to the pound. So the 1966 florin was part of the last breath of the old school system, a final nod to over a century of tradition. Let's talk specs real quick. Like the earlier florins, the 1966 version is made from copper nickel, not silver. It weighs about 11.3 grams, has a diameter of 28.5 millimeters, and a reeded edge. Same specs, consistent design. That's part of what makes this coin series so collectible. If you're putting together a set of Elizabeth II florins, having the 1966 version is a must. Now, you might be asking, is the 1966 florin rare? Well, here's the honest answer, not really. The Royal Mint produced millions of these coins in 1966, and because it was the final year of issue for circulation, they made sure to meet demand. So, you're not looking at a low mintage coin or anything super obscure. That said, collectors still love the 1966 florin because of its historical significance. It marks the end of an era, and that alone makes it collectible. In circulated condition, it's typically worth around £1 to £3, but again, condition is everything. If you've got an uncirculated or proof version, you could be looking at a value of £5 to £15, or even more if it's professionally graded. Now, here's where it gets interesting. The 1966 florin is also one of the coins that saw less time in active use compared to earlier ones. Why? Because by 1971, when decimalization hit, the coin was already on its way out. That means you can still find 1966 florins in great shape because many didn't get beat up in circulation for decades. That's a win for collectors looking for nice examples without breaking the bank. Another cool thing about the 1966 florin is that it's technically part of the decimal system transition. After 1971, the florin actually continued to circulate for a while as the 10 new pence coin because it had the exact same value. People used it interchangeably with the new 10p coins until a smaller 10p was introduced in 1992, at which point the older florins were finally withdrawn. So even though the florin's name disappeared, the coin itself kind of lived on in disguise for a couple more decades. That's wild, right? A Victorian-era coin idea lasted well into the 1990s. Now, if you're into numismatics, the hobby of collecting coins, the 1966 florin is a great place to start or finish a collection. It's affordable, easy to find, and historically meaningful. It doesn't have the crazy rarity factor that some coins do, but does hold a ton of symbolic weight as the last true florin. Let's break down a few reasons why this coin still matters. It's the last official florin before decimalization. It features Queen Elizabeth II during the early part of her reign, still young, still optimistic. It's a snapshot of British currency just before a massive overhaul. It circulated briefly as 10 new pence, giving it a dual identity. Now, how do you spot a good one if you're buying or selling? Look for coins with minimal scratches, clear detail on the Queen's face and hair, and strong reverse design where all the shields and emblems are sharp. Avoid coins that have been cleaned harshly, that can ruin their value. You might also stumble upon mint sets from 1966. The Royal Mint released coin sets in plastic sleeves back then, which sometimes included the florin. If you can find one of these, that coin will almost always be in better condition than anything pulled from circulation. Definitely worth hunting for. Also, be on the lookout for error coins. While the 1966 florin doesn't have any famously documented errors, misstrikes can happen in any year. If you find one with off-center printing, double edges, or unusual blemishes, it could be worth more than you think. And if you're the kind of person who loves storytelling, the 1966 florin is a perfect conversation starter. Imagine showing it to someone younger and explaining how British people used shillings and florins before the modern pounds and pence. It's not just a coin, it's a window into a different world. Thanks for sticking with me through all three coins. Whether it's the 1963, 1956, or this final 1966 piece, each florin tells a unique part of the UK's monetary history.